Welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll on this Friday, May 21st, 2004. Our guest this evening, is at least in the first hour, is physicist Dr. Michael Elliott of 911review.org. This is a return engagement for him, and we'll be talking with him about 9/11 and even more tragically, about the next 9/11. But first, let me remind you that archives of all shows can be accessed at Vyzygoth's GrassyKnoll.org. Every one we've done that we ever saved. I think Harry even found the first one we ever did, which we probably should trash, but we'll probably play it on our anniversary, which is coming up on July 16th for 2 years. You can also listen to past Grassy Knoll shows and other alternative programming on Live 365. Go to pascoradio.org and check out the schedule. We are streaming at kgrn.net. If you're ever going to tell anybody to listen on the net wherever they should be, they click on Listen Live Worldwide 24/7. So if you want to listen to future shows live and you're not near a radio, remember we're on from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time now. Also, during this show and in the second hour, you may send an instant message to ask a question or make a comment if you're on AOL Messenger. And this is the IM address, AM 1350 WDCF. Lastly, the views expressed on the Grassy Knoll are not necessarily those of the management, staff, or advertisers of WDCF, WZHR, and the Tan Talk Network. And now, to go to our guest, Dr. Michael Elliott. We had some reverb on the phone line. Doc, how do you sound now?
Well, I hope better.
Harry Spencer has joined me. He's unusually punctual, and we're here to talk about what brought you back. And the topic on your mind was exactly what?
Well, I wanted to pick up where we left off last time and give you a bit of the evolution from where we were in looking at what really happened on 9/11 and where that makes us think we are now. Because as we went through, our starting point for looking at 9/11 was very simple. A few of us who were pretty good, solid, strong science backgrounds took a look at some of the pictures. Ooh, we got the reverb back.
Yeah, I thought what it was. Okay, we're good.
Okay. Took a look at the evidence of 9/11, and that's especially the pictures. And when we started looking carefully at them, they just didn't add up. They didn't add up to what the sort of Ali bin Laden and his 20 hijackers fairy tale was. And first and foremost, if your listeners have a chance to go to our website and take a look at the picture that we use on the top page for the Pentagon attack. When you look at that picture, it's just really clear that this is not the scene of the crash of an airliner. There's about 110 tons of wreckage that are missing. The lawn is in perfect condition. And there's this huge fireball coming out of it that is just way too hot to be a kerosene fire. So we dig a little further and we look at the damage to the building, and the damage to the building is utterly unbelievable because it cuts through 3 rings of the Pentagon, which has got to be one of the most sturdy buildings ever built, across a path for about 90 yards in a perfectly straight line. In other words, it became clear to us that the Pentagon had been hit by a warhead, no question. And this is the only way of explaining the damage. And, of course, the main media doesn't really tell you that. They don't point these things out. And there were a whole bunch of media stories about, oh, we saw a plane hit the Pentagon and it hit before and it turned over cartwheels and it knocked over lampposts and all the rest of this. So one of our members did a just excellent review of all of the so-called witnesses and tried to see how their stories lined up and who they were. And sure enough, almost all the people that were saying, oh, we saw a 757, either worked for the media or were associated with the military media. And by the time you whittled them out, there were very few people left. But, of course, those were the stories that the media picked up. And sort of the same on the Twin Towers. When you look carefully at the videos and when you look carefully at the photographs, it's very clear the Twin Towers didn't collapse. They exploded. There are these just spectacular photographs on 911review.org by some of them taken by somebody who gave his life to take those pictures. And they show the immense jettisoning of debris out to the side of both buildings before they collapse. And so it's really an explosion, not a collapse. And again, the media and the experts just basically step around that. And they try and explain how kerosene could melt steel, which is physically impossible. And it wasn't a melting collapse anyway. We see collapses from earthquakes. So we started to scratch down and see how the media had reported previous events. And the general approach is just to ignore things. And they did that on 9/11. On 9/11, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in other words, 7 hours after the Twin Towers came down, another building, 47 stories, just collapsed in about 7 seconds flat. That was the Building 7. And we've got videos of that from 3 different angles. It's literally a controlled demolition. And that just happened to be the building in which Rudy Giuliani had his emergency command headquarters, plus the Secret Service, plus who else was in that building, we don't know. And this collapse was just basically black holed by the media. So you got a 47-story office building that collapses in downtown Manhattan, and nobody says anything. So we started scratching the surface a little more, and went back to some of the previous terrorist incidents in the United States. And the most notable one, of course, is the first Trade Center bombing, World Trade Center bombing. And it's in 93. 93, there's a group of sort of, let's call them militants, but we'll put a question mark beside it, in downtown Manhattan, that are associated with a mosque. And when the World Trade Center exploded in 1993, 6 people were killed, hundreds injured. And according to the FBI, they found a bit of the wreckage of the van that had the serial number on it. And they traced the van back to its owner, and they arrested its owner, and they, sure enough, tried him, convicted him, and sent him off to jail. And this is the origin for a lot of the sort of legend that we get about Muslim terrorism. And in fact, if you look into it, and all of this came out at the trial, it's really Muslim patsy-ism, because the poor guy who rented the truck was asked to do it by somebody else, to shuffle some things for her around, and he went, did the job. When he came back, the van had been stolen, so he went and tried and turn it in at the police station. They wouldn't take a report from him. They said they needed the license number and the serial number, and all of that was on the rental papers, which had been taken with the van. I don't know about you, I always leave the rental papers in the glove compartment. Mm-hmm. And when he came back and tried to get his deposit back, he'd been, this is a basically broke guy who'd given a cash deposit. The FBI arrested him and went over and searched his apartment, didn't find anything, went over and searched the apartment of the person who had asked him to do the moving, and found traces of explosives in some of the closets of the apartment. And it turned out that the person who provided all the expertise and all of the explosives for the bombing of the first World Trade Center was an informant for the FBI. And all of this came out at the trial. And this guy had been around. This guy had really been around. He'd been brought into the United States, according to the Boston Globe, on a special program for visas operated by the CIA. And he had trained at Fort Bragg on a special program for Army officers. He was formerly with the Egyptian Army. And then apparently he signed up for the Green Berets, became a U.S. citizen, and worked for about 3 or 4 years training bin Laden's bodyguards. And I kid you not, he was in the Special Forces training bin Laden's bodyguards. It's about like 85, 86. And because he had been around the block, when he was setting the patsies up in New York for the first World Trade Center bombing, he taped his conversations with the patsies for the FBI, but he was also smart enough to tape his conversations with the FBI for himself. And he kept those conversations. At the trial, it came out that the FBI provided the explosives for the first World Trade Center bombing, and those explosives, they said they would switch at the last moment so nothing happened. But sure enough, they never switched it. And in effect, the first World Trade Center bombing was done with material and expertise provided by the FBI. And this is what we call fake terror. And what we started to see was after the fake terror incidents, you'll see a piece of legislation come through. And the legislation will be draconian police state legislation. And after the first World Trade Center bombing, the piece of legislation that came through became ultimately the Effective Death Penalty Act. And it ran into opposition. This was under Clinton. And the second bombing comes along and takes care of that. No problem. The second bombing was Oklahoma City. And the Effective Death Penalty Act was passed very shortly after. So we're starting to see this pattern of terrorist events where the FBI or the intelligence agencies are directly implicated as they are in 9/11. And sure enough, days after 9/11, the Patriot Act shows up, 690 pages. They pretend that it was all written in 5 days and try and just basically ram that through Congress. And they were starting to have a little trouble with the Congress. There were 2 senators, because by then Bush had lost control of the Senate. It was in Democratic hands. And there were 2 senators in particular that were leading the opposition. One was Leahy, one was Daschle. And this is, of course, the 2 most important senators. It was the head of the Judiciary Committee and the head of the Senate, the majority leader for the Senate. And about 5 days later, they get an envelope containing anthrax. And so the scare in the Capitol because of the anthrax was basically used to push through the Patriot Act.
Let me stop you for a second, if I could, Michael. One, I think that was Ashcroft's answer to the both of them for being critical. And 2, we have a listener, and I cannot say for what concern he works, but he documented the fact that Homeland Security was drafted through the 90s and that there was a foundation that openly bragged about having drafted it.
Yes, and he's probably referring to the Answer Institute and their sub-branch for Homeland Security. Yes, you're absolutely right. There were work done for basically building the foundations of the terror state. But in order to translate that into legislation, it really takes quite a bit of time if you're going to do it with any care and precision.
Right.
And this bill appeared almost magically. This bill also was very interesting in the fact that the normal process in the Democratic way of handling things is to give it over to a committee to be reviewed, both by the House, both by the Senate. As far as I know, that never happened. And Ron Paul, who's a senator from Texas,
right,
and an educated and a bright one. I think he's a medical doctor before he became a congressman.
What a step down.
Yes, it goes from helping people to...
Oh, I know.
And he said literally nobody read the Patriot Act when it went through. They just bulldozed it until the last moment, kept changing things, kept the House in session until midnight, and basically rammed it through. And this kind of pattern of trying to create an event that will allow the next piece of police state agenda to go through is starting to get a little alarming, because we've seen it 2 or 3 times now in the States, and we've got the next piece of legislation waiting in the wings, and it's called, of course, the Patriot Act 2. And that has been given to Cheney as President of the Senate. It's not been introduced yet. But we're starting to ask ourselves, what do we do, or what's the event that's going to go along with the Patriot Act 2?
Let me ask you a question, if I can, real quick.
Sure.
Do you recall back during the Reagan administration when they had Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North up on the stand? Somewhere along that time, in his testimony, emerged a comment from him that one of his jobs working for the Reagan administration was to look for ways during times of emergencies to effectively set aside the Constitution so that the government could work effectively. And I'm wondering now, looking back on that, if they weren't actually tweaking and drafting the first parts of this legislation all the way back to the Reagan administration.
It's unfortunately much worse than that. Yes, you're absolutely right. And Oliver North, it turns out, was absolutely key. And what he did was draft not legislation, but what are called executive orders. And executive orders in the United States are on the sole signature of the president.
Right.
They never go through Congress. And Oliver North was a real busy little beaver there at the National Security Council in between smuggling all the drugs. And one of the things he did, and you can go to an excellent paper on our site done by probably one of America's only investigative journalists these days, and it's called FEMA, the Secret Government. And Oliver North drafted 3 or 4 executive orders for FEMA. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And they're the people that are meant to be there for when, Florida gets hit by a hurricane.
Sure.
Florida, Andrew, and things like that. Only problem is in the last sort of 10 or 15 years, especially since Oliver North, 85% of FEMA's budget has become secret. They give no details even to Congress on it. And in that secret budget in Oliver North's time was a program called Rex 84.
Right.
And Rex 84 was there to relocate people like you and me and millions of other people to internment camps. And more recently, 2002, the government has been letting contracts, and we refer to it on our What's Next page on 9/11 Review, for getting those internment camps in order. And the legislation, the executive orders, because it'd be really a stretch to call it legislation, that Oliver North drafted is still on the books. And with a signal signature, President of the United States can suspend the Constitution, declare martial law, and under the executive orders, Congress is not even allowed to review his actions for 6 months. And that's if Congress is in session. So this is what Ollie North set up for us. I'm sure the other things he did are still ongoing, but this is the real heritage of Oliver North.
Michael, if I could add something also at this time. Ever since the Japanese internment in the United States, detention camps have really never gone away. They've been denied. Harry and I did a show about a speech given up in Harvard in 1955 by a then-leading Republican, John Lord O'Brien, who was very afraid of what was going on in the name of the bad old communists and how we have to watch out for them. And he referred in 1955 to detention camps. There was an article in Life magazine, I believe it was Life, written by an editor who said there are detention camps out there. But they're always denied. So you see, they really are there, but it's the ugly little secret that the government likes to keep.
Yes, but we're starting to get better at this. We're starting to wake up, and we do have the internet to help coordinate these kinds of things. And one of the things we've started doing is, for example, we watch especially ARPA, but in general, the awarding of contracts, because when contracts get awarded, they get published in most of the cases, and we started seeing these preparations for exactly those camps, which, as you say, date all the way back to the 40s and 50s, getting them ship-shape and in order.
They're actually refurbishing some of the former Japanese internment camps as well out in the West.
I would not be surprised, especially if Schwarzenegger's anywhere nearby.
I don't have the tumor. I know.
So this is something that I think your listeners can really help, because in a certain sense, tracking these things and tracking these camps takes people down on the ground at the local level. And even though this is all coordinated out of Washington, it's all done through local authorities. And the local authorities are usually, nice people like you and I kind of thing. It's the federal program you have to look out for. And this is all documented in an article from 1995 that we have up on our website that actually links back to the Library of Congress copies of the executive orders. And it's called FEMA, the Secret Government. Now, if you happen to ask yourself, when's the last time you saw Cheney out above ground?
Yeah, I know.
It would probably date back quite a long time, back to when he was pushing his Enron Energy Committee. And Cheney's been very low-key. Well, I don't think he's been low-key. He's been underground, quite literally. And FEMA has a set of facilities that they call continuity of government facilities. And on 9/11, they moved large portions of the active government into continuity of government bunkers without telling anybody. Needless to say, there were no Democrats in there. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing left, right, and center getting set up. And we're starting to get the feeling that there's a setup. And the setup has to do with FEMA. And if you look at the Library of Congress and you go to one of the current bills they have before the House, House 2844, it's only a 2-page bill. It's really kind of cute. It says if too many representatives get wiped out from any state in some large event, then the House can declare elections in that state for representatives on a 21-day time period.
If I could, Michael, I have that in front of me, and it says, the bill's summary says, to require states to hold special elections to fill vacancies in the House of Representatives not later, as you said, than 21 days after the vacancy is announced by the Speaker of the House of Representatives in extraordinary circumstances and for other purposes. And they go on later to define extraordinary circumstances. That's a beauty, as having lost 100 members.
Right.
Whoa.
What happens if the Speaker of the House is one of the 100 members that get off?
Then Al Haig becomes president.
Al Haig takes over. Good.
You? Well, I'm sure somebody will be in control. We can be sure of that. This is absolutely essential. You've got a republic, or supposedly a republic, that's been through 2 world wars, all sorts of other disasters over 230, 40 years. When has anybody ever needed to have this kind of power concentrated into the House? 21-day elections is just totally unheard of in the United States. The U.S. is on fixed election cycles. The British system's more flexible. They tend to have their elections on, they can call an election, 90 days, 120 days away. But the United States doesn't operate like that, never has, probably never will.
And what kind of a candidate would you get with a 21-day cycle?
Anyone they wanted.
Anyone they wanted is the right answer. And they would be able to basically handpick the House. And so we've got another indication here that we're looking at about 100 House representatives that are going to go up in smoke in the near future.
That's amazing that they just come up with this when you consider the peak of the Cold War and the threat of nuclear war was around the corner at every turn, and you would have thought that some sort of legislation like that would have been drafted back in the 50s.
Absolutely. And this is, we're at a time of peace, right?
Exactly.
And this is the kind of legislation that's starting to make us sit up and take notice. And in with this, there were about a half dozen other little things that started to draw our attention to the fact that if they get away with 9/11, we've got to ask what's next.
And we'll end on that note right now before we go to commercials. We've been talking about 9/11 past.
I warned you about the Grassy Knoll on WDCF AM 1350.
That was a little better.
What he's referring to, Michael, is he hates my bump or whatever I do. It's never good.
It's like Sesame Street.
Yeah, great to hear that song again.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, and ask him where he got it.
I won't.
Okay.
No, he thinks he had a version he gave to me, but he doesn't know that I got it off Crazy Iowa DC's music list.
Okay.
All right, now, we were talking about what has happened. Do you want to switch gears in the second half to what might be coming?
Well, around the fall, we started to see these things like that interview saying that if we get another, there was the interview in GQ, if we get another terrorist attack, well, the Constitution's going to go. And you start to look at the media constructs that went into 9/11. We did the physics, we did the images, we did the bogus images, we did the photoshopped images from the Pentagon. And sooner or later, somebody got around to doing the media construction, the legend, what we call the legend. And there's an absolutely excellent article on our site that's called Truth, Lies, and Legend of 9/11. It'll take you a day or two to go through. It's about 60 pages long. But he deconstructs the whole setup in the media of the different bits and pieces. And in almost all cases, their setup, for example, in 9/11, there was basically nobody in the United States ever charged with facilitating it, except for Moussaoui. And Moussaoui's still on trial, and Moussaoui's handwritten notes are on the internet, and he says the government was behind 9/11, which is quite interesting, but they tried a couple of other people over in England and in Germany. Rassi was arrested shortly after 9/11, maybe September 29th, I think, in England. And he was just this was trumpeted as being an absolutely huge event. Mueller said this was a great break in the war on terrorism. And sooner or later it came to trial, and it came up to a British judge because it wasn't in America, and the British judge took a look at the evidence. And the evidence that the United States supplied was a webcam photo of the accused with the cousin of one of the supposed patsies, and that was it. And the judge just lambasted the prosecution, threw the court case out, and he's now suing the U.S. government $30 million. And we tried to trace back where the bits and pieces of the media legend got constructed. And we started to see who were the shills, who were the people in the media that were contributing the stories. And all of the stories make a sort of, a thin veneer for things like the Washington Post and the New York Times. And if you scratch them, they all fall apart. Take a look at Truth, Lies, and Legend and watch how the supposed paymaster for 9/11 weaves duck and dodges, or gets killed twice, or gets arrested with great fanfare a year after his wife says he was killed in a shootout. And we started to see in the fall of last year the beginning of another set of constructions towards a follow-up to 9/11 in the United States in the near time frame. And of course the speculation is, or the speculation has become, we'll have a follow-up to 9/11 instead of an election, because they don't have a sure thing with the black box voting machines. They haven't gotten enough of them in yet. And the odds of an attack within the United States to preempt the election, of course, are very high. And on our site, we go through the bits and pieces of the media legend that is being constructed towards another event. And, of course, they all say, it's the same people that did 9/11. Well, we know the people that did 9/11 are in Washington. So we agree it is the same people who will do the follow-up.
Let me interject here real quick. In recent news, have you been following this, quote, 9/11 committee that was in New York the other day? C-SPAN actually had to pull away from the coverage of it because people in the back were beginning to scream that the people that were responsible for 9/11 was the United States government.
This is some of our crew. Some of our crew weren't allowed in. But there's a great Associated Press photo. I think it was when Rudy the Recycler was testifying.
Yes, it was.
And it's Karen Brightweiser, one of the Jersey girls, I think, who has a sign up, and it just says one word, and that's lies.
You bet.
And that's all that is. I mean, they didn't even bother appointing a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court this time. I guess he was too busy duck hunting. But this is just a sham. 3,000 people are dead, and this is just a sham. So we really basically have been ignoring that. I've got all sorts of questions. Would love to ask Rudy the Recycler. But needless to say, they don't take our questions. And in fact, like you say, C-SPAN's been cutting us out. A couple of times over this is back 2 or 3 months ago, a couple of people associated with 911review.org got some questions in at the microphone, and they hummed and hawed and didn't answer them. But that segment got cut out of the C-SPAN coverage. So you are in basically a Stalinist censorship mode here. People just get airbrushed out, and the questions get airbrushed out. This is the kind of media we have to live with, and this is why people like yourself and your program are just so important, because really the alternative is the only alternative we have is radio. And we've got to construct our own alternative to the media. But we've got to do it quickly, because if we are reading the signs correctly, they are getting set up very soon by putting through, there's the bits and pieces that we look at. For example, George Bush was saying that we will have an attack before the next election. So this is the Washington Post, I guess 24th of April, somewhere around there. So it's not like they're being subtle. They're being very blatant. But what worries us even more is the legislative agenda that we're seeing. And we referred to the executive orders. One thing to remember about executive orders, besides the fact that they are not reviewed by Congress, and in certain cases not reviewable by Congress, is that in the recent history of the United States, I think the last one that was ever overturned was by Abraham Lincoln. So in other words, when they put these things forward, the chances of overturning it, no matter how unconstitutional it is, are very, very small. And we see what's waiting for us by reading through the FEMA-based executive orders by Oliver North and others. And in this sort of construct, we've got to look also at the legislative agenda elsewhere. Because unlike previous coups d'etats in the United States, the really big difference this time with the war on freedom is that they're going global. They're going for the whole banana. And that's the world. And we are starting to see a legislative agenda basically inspired by or imposed by this U.S. terror cabal or terror cartel go through Australia, Canada, Britain. Britain has before them a bill called the Civil Contingencies Bill, which is even more draconian than the Homeland Security Act of 2002, and basically implements the equivalent of the executive orders. Canada is just about to pass Bill C7, which is what we call Canada's Patriot Act 3. Any Canadians should look on the website to the link, Canada's Patriot Act 3. And this agenda is getting put in place so that they're going to be ready for the summer. And they're going to be ready for when, of course, the Congress is not in session. And we've got to take these things quite seriously in the sense that we know they did 9/11, and we know they did the first World Trade Center bombing. And if they get away with it, you've really got to ask yourself, what's next?
Well, we had a prelude also, I believe, with the railway bombing in Spain.
I'm not sure about that myself, just because Spain has a fairly long history with problems with Morocco. The Spanish Policeros fought for a long number of years. I have no information on the Spanish one.
But don't also get sucked into the fact that, yeah, there are real terrorists out there, we know, but they also might be, shall we say, massaged to do what the handlers want them to do.
Absolutely, and the real difference between the real terror and the fake terror is the fake terror, they always have a piece of legislation lined up to go with it. Right. And they also tend to kill a whole lot more people. They did it in the 70s and 80s with the Bologna rail bombing.
Go ahead, Harry. Just step all over the little drop in there, all right?
I was just tears welling up in my eyes.
The show's coming to an end soon.
I can't even see.
Yeah, I know. With us is Dr. Michael Elliott, a physicist of quantum physics. Is that correct, Doc?
That's right.
All right, that's scary to even contemplate, but he's with us to talk about in this last segment the 9/11 yet to come. And take it away, Doc.
Well, we started watching this media build-up as we were talking about, and one of the things that just sort of jumped out, exploded onto the American scene, was Richard Clark. Richard Clark comes fresh from being really on the insides of things, writes a great book. Well, sorry, I haven't read it. He writes a book, and that just gets put on all of the newspapers and all of the television and all of the coverage. Well, according to legend that he sets out, well, he really awoke to the real dangers of Al-Qaeda, which we spell A-L-C-I-A-D-U-H, in 1993 at the World Trade Center bombing. But when you scratch the World Trade Center bombing, you find the people at the center of it are both the FBI providing the expertise and the explosives and the CIA down the street with an operation they built up over 5 years. And somehow, I don't think Richard Clark seems to have mentioned that in the interviews I've seen with him. And there's wall-to-wall coverage. He's almost treated like a new hero. And, of course, he's coming apparently criticizing the administration, but, of course, criticizing them on something that doesn't matter. And in the build-up with Richard Clark, you see it going to an apex, or sort of a point that was the reason for this whole shimmer. And that was an interview he gave with Ted Koppel. I don't know if you saw it. There's a transcript on the internet. This was on Nightline. And he basically trots out the inevitability of a nuclear attack in the United States, and that how all of those orders that Oliver North drew up are going to be good and good for you. And this really makes us stop and look very carefully, because this, we believe, is part of the setup. And unfortunately, in a certain sense, we had a bit of an advantage on 9/11, which was their fairy tale was so full of holes and so sort of contrived, we were able to take apart and shred it. You referred to the fact that I've done work in quantum physics. I'm used to tackling some fairly hard problems. When you tackle a hard problem in physics, you look for the weakest link, you try and chip away at it and go for it. When we started looking at 9/11, there are no links that stand up. Some of them aren't even there. You just blow on them and they're dust and they just disintegrate. On the other hand, if we wake up one morning and find Baltimore gone, and a note in Richard Clark's mailbox saying, well, it was L-CIA-DUH, we're not going to know. And having the draconian legislation sitting, waiting in the rings, Patriot Act 2 has sections for people like yourself, it allows them to, on the sole signature of the Attorney General, revoke your citizenship and export you to the country of their choice. And probably that's one where they have some nice little prison like Abu Ghraib waiting for you. And these things are coming together almost at a head. And we're starting to worry that this will take place in a very short time scale. Unless America really starts to realize that if they don't get the truth of 9/11 out, we're really inviting another one.
That's correct. And do you want to touch upon at this time, obviously the link that you have on the website, 911review.org, the coming nuke?
The coming nuke is a thread that we have picked up in the foreign press that was very similar to one of the threads that was woven on the supposed paymaster of 9/11. Of course, the paymaster for 9/11 is the $30 billion intelligence budget that comes out of Congress, but they didn't really say that way. And they tried to create this alternate cash flow for the paymaster of 9/11. And the bits and pieces of that story started with finger-pointing at Pakistan by India. And we're seeing finger-pointing by India saying that Pakistan provided Iran with illegal nuclear weapons. Now, what happened was the head of the nuclear program was arrested in Pakistan, and the president of Pakistan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, refused to proceed.
Basically forgave him.
Basically, well, I'm going to say refused to proceed, because it's not clear that there was anything to forgive. But if you noticed, soon after he forgave him, there were car bombs waiting for him, twice, very close. So we've got to look at the media story that's being created, and they're weaving Libya in there, and I think that's why Libya's come back on the scene as a born-again freedom fighter. And look at this build-up towards a nuclear event, or we've detected this other thread because of the biological preparations that are embedded in the Homeland Security Act for giving people like you and me forced inoculations, which go very well with Oliver North's internment camps. We're looking at two possible scenarios in a very short time. And unless we start to expose the workings of this sort of shadow government, I think this is the kind of thing we can look forward to.
I'm concerned that as these 9/11 hearings might have taken an unexpected turn for the reptiles, that they and other things start to build up on them, that people get hip. I'm afraid that's when they're going to turn around and do something, because then they can just quash any kind of resistance whatsoever.
I used to think like that, and then I basically realized that they're going to do it anyway.
Oh, yeah. I just think it's going to accelerate the time. Yeah.
It may change their timing, but I kind of doubt it. These things are set up years in advance.
Well, we've said this before. You know, when Gary Hart made an appearance on Hannity and Combs on the Blowtorch 77 out of New York City, he said there's going to be another attack. He did not hedge what he said.
And he belongs to the Council on Foreign Relations.
And listen to this. How rich is this? He names these three cities: Denver, Dallas, or Cleveland.
There's some really interesting stuff going on at the Dallas airport, that's for sure. Denver airport.
Oh, the Denver, you mean the New World Airport?
The New World Airport. Yes, those are likely candidates, but don't forget, you got to take out 100 representatives.
Well, what happened, I would think, you're right, Michael, but our scenario is what you have to do to make a clean break with the Constitutional Republic of the United States of America is, one, trash D.C., so you really have to turn away, and then you look toward Denver.
Yes, and that's exactly the setup we're seeing. Now, it doesn't actually, things are getting a little out of hand here. There's no need to actually rule out London or Vancouver.
Good point.
Because both prime ministers are up for re-election, and Tony Blair's going to have a rough ride. And they have put through the Civil Contingencies Bill legislation, and as long as they happen to take out the mayor because he's in the left wing, they'll be just fine if they hit London too. So
I agree.
Let me throw this in real quick. This is your time, I know, Michael, but there's a card game called the Illuminati card game.
And that is just amazing. And on that one,
1995, they called it.
They called the Pentagon just perfectly. They called the Twin Towers hit in 1995 to the right story. And
they have a card there that shows the Tower of London.
Coincidence.
Falling over in a nuclear blast.
Big Ben comes down.
Big Ben, I'm sorry, you're right, Big Ben.
There's one other thing that's in that deck, which is a little worrying, because as you said, we have 2 pages. We got What's Next, which develops the biological terrorism, and don't forget, the only biological terrorists are American. They used it on the anthrax attacks on 9/11. And we got this other thread that another one of our researchers pulled out, which is this coming nuke thread. Well, in that deck, there is a card which says both at the same time.
Now, can they access that on your website? I've done it through Cutting Edge newsletter. Can they get it on yours?
Yes, they will be able to. Get them to sign up for our announcements list, and we'll get that page up on the first World Trade Center bombing. That's going up this weekend, and we'll do one on the cards next week. Yeah. And the week after, we'll do our take on the Berg video.
Was I the one that gave you that thing, by the way?
Yes, you were.
Oh, all right. Now it comes all back to me.
Absolutely. Because we've taken a look at the Berg video frame by frame.
Right.
And I don't know if you look, but this thing's not standing up very well.
No, it's
so
bogus.
Within 2 weeks, we should have a page up on that. Get them to go to 911review.org, and there's a list there. There's a click there for signing up to our mailing list. And if you get on our mailing list, then we'll be able to let you know when we have new pages.
Well, you heard it right there. Go to 911review.org. Dr. Michael Elliott's a major force behind that. Doc, it goes by so quickly, but I'm glad you came back and shared that with us, and no doubt you'll come back again, will you not?
Always a pleasure to be on your show, Viz.
All right, God bless you and good night.
Thanks.